Hey guys, welcome to the Hollywood Guide, a podcast designed to provide insight about the inner workings of the TV and film industry in Los Angeles. Each episode, we talk to someone currently working and living in LA and find out everything you need to know to navigate the entertainment capital of the world. If you're an amateur writer, actor, director, producer, etc., then this is definitely the show for you. My name is Courtney Jonathas, and I'm your host. I'm a grad student studying mass communication, and I actually spent this past summer working in LA, so most of my guests will be people I connected with while there. For today's episode, I actually have two very special guests. Annabelle Boyanova and Jordan Mahoney are both members of Groundswell Productions. Groundswell is the Los Angeles-based production company behind TV hits such as Showtime's Smilf, Sci-Fi's The Magicians, and FX's Snowfall. They were both such a great help to me when I interned at Groundswell over the summer, so I'm very confident that they'll have some great insight to share with you all. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show today.
Thanks for having us.
And how's your day going so far? I know you guys are typically very busy.
It's actually been a little bit more quiet since everyone started to take off for the Thanksgiving holidays, so It's been a little bit quieter around here.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. When do you guys take off? Are you guys going out of town for the holiday?
I'm staying in town. I think Jordan's heading back
home. I'm driving to Phoenix to see the family, which will be nice.
Oh, okay.
The 1 month where the weather's tolerable in Phoenix.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started with you guys telling us a little bit about your individual backgrounds?
So I went to film school down in Orange County. I studied creative producing at Chapman University, and I knew I wanted to go into development, specifically for television. So I started out at an agency called William Morris and Endeavor, WME, and I worked there for about a year for two agents. And then at that point, I had kind of made enough connections and met enough people to eventually find the opportunity here at Groundswell, and I made the jump to Groundswell and have been here ever since.
Awesome. How about you, Jordan?
I started off in Phoenix. I went to ASU in film and media studies and with an emphasis on screenwriting. And then rather than moving to LA after graduating, I decided to move to New Mexico for a few years because I was born in New Mexico and have some family out there, so I had a few small connections. So I ended up going to Albuquerque and Santa Fe and working kind of freelance on different TV shows as an art PA and an office PA and even a set dresser on an indie movie. And then I want to write and hopefully direct one day, so I kind of realized you have to come to either Los Angeles or New York. So I moved to LA. I had kind of got enough contacts from my shows that I was working on in New Mexico and moved out here, and then incidentally got a job at the Weinstein Company as my first job, which was definitely a baptism by fire. Obviously, everyone kind of knows what happened there. So that was a very tumultuous and very characteristically LA experience. And then I got out of there, and now I'm here at Groundswell, which is a wonderful change of pace.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing now in terms of your work with Groundswell?
So a big chunk of our work is actively maintaining and keeping up to date on everything for the three shows that we have on air that you mentioned earlier. It kind of depends what time of year it is and what's going on specifically with each show, since they all have different schedules. But for example, right now, Smilf is gearing up for a potential season 3 if we do get one. And so we're kind of at the stage where we are reading a lot of writers to figure out who we might want in the writer's room for season 3 if it happens. So that's been a huge part of our daily work over the past weeks. We're constantly discussing writers and in touch with Frankie Shaw, the showrunner, and the studio and the network. And then on top of that, we have all of the different projects that we're developing that are also in various stages. We have things in development with AMC and Hulu and FX and various places around town. And again, those are all kind of at different stages. Some are as early as just being an outline, and others where we have done multiple revisions on drafts. So it kind of just depends what has come in that week. That's generally our focus. So if a new draft of a script has come in, that's what we're reading that week and discussing and writing notes on, and so on and so forth. And then the third piece of it is kind of just all of the available material, potential projects, things that we're reading at all times. That's kind of always going on. And writers that we're meeting every day. We all have meetings with writers for either specific projects or just to generally get to know them to potentially work together in the future. So it's kind of a little bit of an amalgam of all of that, and every day differs just depending on what's priority at the time.
Cool. And for those that may not know a ton about the TV and film development process, can you guys walk us through how Groundswell usually goes about acquiring projects and producing them?
Sure. So again, there are many different ways which this process can go through. But I would say the two main methods through which we acquire projects is we either find a piece of material first, whether that be a book, an article, anything like that, that we happen to think would be a great show or a feature. And from there, we might go about trying to find a writer for it who could develop a take, or finding a studio home for it, or then taking it out and pitching it to a network. Or the other part of that is we meet with writers a lot, as I just mentioned, and sometimes they will come to us with ideas, or writers we have relationships with for years, that we keep in touch with will come to us and say, hey, I have an idea that I would love to, come pitch to you. So we also hear a lot of ideas, and if there's something that we really spark to, we might also come to a project that way.
Okay. And I know you guys mentioned that you do a lot of reading. How many scripts would you say you guys read per week on average? And what are some things in a script that usually make you more inclined to push for Groundswell to get involved in producing it? Like, what makes a script stand out?
It kind of depends. Some weeks are busier than others with submissions. Sometimes we'll have, 10 agents call in a day and all submit something. And, every agent will call and say that, something's really hot and gaining traction and getting a lot of heat. So that kind of gives you the incentive to drop everything and read it. And then sometimes we'll get samples in of writers just to be aware of and know in general. And then, like Annabelle said, we're looking to potentially staff for an upcoming season of Smilf. So we'll be kind of reading and sniffing out material that would fit in that vein or that mold. So yeah, depending on the week, we can read a ton of scripts, and we'll always kind of devote our entire weekends to reading. So a lot gets done, obviously, that way. And then we'll pass off a lot of stuff to interns. As you know, interns will do coverage on scripts that we might not have the time to read, or et cetera.
Or that we need a second pair of eyes on, because that always helps. If it's a slow week, we might only get 10 things in that we split up, or if it's a busy week, it could be anywhere to 20.
Right.
And we're a company of 4.
And then when it comes to taking a script that stands out or considering it for development, there's kind of a ton of factors that go into that. I mean, first and foremost is kind of just the quality and the character of the script, and whether it has a kind of unique and distinct voice, because so many scripts might be, on paper, formulaic and, technically well-written and competent, and, they're kind of passing, but we kind of look for scripts that are elevated, they kind of lift off the page and have a very unique and distinct style and voice and life to them. And then beyond that, we have to kind of take into the more business-minded decisions of what network could the script live on. Is the material too challenging, or is it too niche? Is it accessible? Are networks looking for something like this? So,
is there an audience for it?
Right. So there's always kind of a ton of factors that we keep in mind when reading.
Okay.
Yep.
And what are some reasons that you guys will typically pass on a script?
I mean, that's hard to answer because there are a variety of reasons, and it also entirely depends on the individual script and what we're reading it for. But like Jordan just said, we really have to consider so many factors because when you are committing to develop a project, that's a lot of time and effort that's going to be put in. And it's also you're branding that script and that project with a stamp of your company. So you're saying this is something we want to develop and we believe in. And so it's not just, again, as he said, it's not just about something being technically well written. It also has to be something that we're all passionate about. So I think most of the time we end up passing on scripts that are just good enough, but don't have anything, that doesn't have anything special or unique about it that speaks to us individually and makes us really excited to talk more about it and discuss it with others and really want to go
spend our time and energy like bringing this to fruition.
Because it is a lot of time and energy that it would then be put into it. So that's kind of a hard one. It's hard to say exactly why we might pass on a script because there are also times where we read something and say, this is really great. I love the voice. It's exciting, but we're not in an environment right now. You know, the market doesn't have any desire for a piece like this. We don't think it would sell. So maybe now is not the right moment for it. But because that also will happen. So it's not always necessarily just that it's not good enough. Sometimes there are great things that we pass on for other reasons as well.
Okay, makes sense. And with regard to some of the writers that you guys might work with on projects, what do you guys think are some of the qualities in a writer that make them like easy to work with when you guys are trying to, accomplish a goal or complete a project?
I would say really helpful when writers are very open to collaborating, very open to notes, and really are willing to listen to all of the input, even if they don't necessarily agree with all of it, because there's nothing worse than when a writer gets defensive when we as producers are giving notes, because the notes process is very much so, a give and take, a push and pull. We give notes. The writer does not take all the notes, because obviously they should only be taking notes that make sense and feel right. But in order to do that, the prerequisite to that is that the writer just has to be open to that process and open to having a dialogue about the notes and it not necessarily just being black and white as if we're saying you have to implement all of these, which is not the case. So just kind of being able to have that kind of conversation and having writers be very open and approachable in that way is, I think, the most helpful thing.
I think Jordan mentioned interns earlier and how you guys sometimes give interns scripts to read because you have a lot of material coming in. But aside from that, can you just give a little bit more detail with regard to the role that interns play at Groundswell?
Yes. So because we're very small, it's myself and Jordan and Michael London and Jessica Schulman. There's only 4 of us. So our interns are really vital. We really try to have our interns, have an active hand in reading material that comes in that we are considering, but also we like to have interns read, new drafts of our projects that come in so that they can also become familiar with the projects that we're developing as a company. But our interns really help us kind of parse through all the material that comes in and really help us figure out whether it's even worth considering because we just get so much. And so that's why it's really important when we first have our interns come in, we like to give them a taste of what our material is like and what we're actively developing so they can get a sense of what do we look for as a company, because every company is looking for different kinds of material to develop.
Yeah, and we also try to loop in the interns into our development process, whether it's just having them overhear conversations and recent updates on projects, because oftentimes we'll also have them read projects that we're already developing, just because Annabelle and myself have often read a draft that's in its like maybe 3rd or 4th iteration, and it's kind of hard to get removed from it. So it's always good to have our interns read so that we get, another third-party perspective and a pair of fresh eyes, and maybe catch something that we missed and get some opinions that kind of either, validate our feelings or provide a new input. So, yeah. It's really helpful.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed that aspect of my internship. And I found out that interns actually have a lot of power, so it's kind of cool in some ways. What kinds of qualities or skills do people usually need to work as an assistant or as a coordinator at a production company? I know you guys kind of have some experience doing that. And whenever people want to work up to where they ultimately want to be, whether it's, being a writer or director, they're going to have to kind of step into these roles. So can you give us just a bit of an idea of what skills people need?
Yes. So whether you want to write, direct, or produce, a lot of people will find themselves as an assistant at a production company as the first step. Even if eventually they don't want to work at a production company in the long run, it's a really great position to be in to learn for any of those roles, depending on what you want to do. And it's just really, I think, primarily about being enthusiastic and open-minded to help support your boss in whatever way you can, help support the company in whatever way you can. There are basics like having to answer phones, but for the most part, it's really just about being personable and professional in a working environment, because really what you're here to do is help answer the phones and schedule meetings. Even though that's technically your job, what you're actually doing most of the time is learning via helping set all these things, connecting phone calls and then listening to all of these conversations play out. Even though you're technically not a part of them yet, this is what you're going to be doing one day. And so even though you are technically administrative support at this point in that position, it's actually an incredible way to absorb and learn, because you're going to be having those conversations one day. And from there, as long as you show initiative and, when scripts come in, depending on where you're working, it's not always really expected that as somebody's assistant, you read everything that comes into your boss. But what's the best practice to do is read everything that comes in. That way you can discuss it with your boss and show that initiative and kind of start that dialogue to show that you're willing to do more on the creative side and take on more work and learn more from them. And a lot of this business is paying it forward. So it kind of functions in that way where if you're enthusiastic and you show that you're willing to do what's needed for the job on the administrative side, that you will also kind of hopefully find a mentor who will teach you and involve you more on the creative process where you are interested.
And what would you say are some of the best ways to get a job at a production company or a studio to get your career started? Like, what approach have you guys used in the past to get jobs in the industry?
Meeting people. I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, like, I went to film school. I went to an agency as my first job, and those are two very common ways that people say, if you do that, it'll help you get a job more easily. But when it comes down to it, it's not necessarily that I went to film school or that I worked at an agency. It's that when I was doing those things, I was putting in the effort to meet all of these different people who have now, gone on to various jobs in the industry, and I still keep in touch with them. And being at those jobs allowed me more easily to meet those people, but actually making those connections with people. And I also interned a lot when I was in college, making connections with the people that I met at those internships and keeping in touch with them. Ultimately, those relationships were what helped me get all my next internships and then my first job and then my next job. It was all about, having relationships with people who know that I'm a hard worker and know what I'm interested in, and wanted to support me.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Jordan?
I agree with that, definitely. It's a matter of kind of putting yourself out there and not being afraid to kind of ask people for advice and help. Mm-hmm. And, if you run into someone who's in the industry, even if it's not necessarily a job you want to do, just reaching out to them and offering to buy them a coffee or lunch and just having an informational meeting will kind of get you kind of the network and putting your feelers out there. A lot of times you'll unexpectedly find a job that way. Like, I was an office PA in New Mexico, and it was kind of a roundabout way to do what I wanted, but I eventually met enough people who had been through the agency system and the studio system that I eventually met enough people to where I got a reference to go work at a studio. So, from working at like some tiny production office in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, I was able to get an interview at Paradigm Agency, and then I also interviewed at a studio just through these connections. You'll often find, I guess I wouldn't turn down like a job that you might not think you want to do, because you might end up finding, a way or an opportunity or some sort of way into what you want to do eventually. So it's definitely a matter of reaching out and also not turning down opportunities.
Yeah, I definitely like going off of that. There's no one direct correct path to what you want to do. You can start at an agency, not start at an agency, start at a production company, start in production rather than in an office. There are so many different avenues to get where you want to go, and the nice thing about this industry is that you can move around a lot laterally. In fact, it's actually expected. This is not an industry where you go work and sit at the same office desk for 15, 20 years or more. This is the exact opposite of that. There's a lot of movement, and it's normal, and it really, I think it really allows you to kind of dip your toes in certain areas of the industry. And once you figure out, okay, this is the direction I like, I'm going to keep try to grow in this direction. Or you can figure out, this might not be the right thing for me, and make a lateral move after that, because chances are, even though you figured out that job wasn't right for you, all the people you met at that job have also probably worked in other areas of the industry, or have friends who work in other areas of the industry who know of opportunities that they can help you get interviews for or recommend you for.
And what advice do you have for anyone who maybe doesn't live in LA, but maybe they would like to move there someday and work in film and television, but they're just kind of like discouraged and maybe think it's a pipe dream? Like, what kind of advice would you have for them?
In terms of like what somebody who doesn't live in LA should try to do in preparation of like potentially coming to LA or trying to pursue, working in the film and TV industry, is just watch a lot of film and TV, but watch what you're interested in. Find what you like. Find what you find what, if you want to be a writer or you think you might want to be a writer, find shows and watch shows that you would have wanted to write for. Find ideas that you're interested in writing. Just make sure that you have your own voice and your own opinion and perspective, because 99% of the time, even though the work experience on your resume does mean something, most of the time it does come down to, in the room, how you click with people. And I think a lot of people are daunted about coming to LA, especially if they live elsewhere, because it seems like, I've got to have certain work experience on my resume, but it's actually not the case. A lot of people come to LA from across the country and even the world to join the film and TV industry, and most of the time it's really just about putting yourself out there and just having, your own opinion and being your own person, and people will respond to that.
In terms of getting work, unless you find another job outside the industry that you for sure have, rather than kind of moving on a whim and just kind of going in blind, I would kind of take your time. It's what I did, and sometimes it can be frustrated as you feel you're wasting your time or your youth. But, I made sure to get enough connections or do my research and save money to where I was in a comfortable spot to move. And then, as you know, whether you're in school or even if you're done with school, I would research internships. It's often kind of frustrating, the idea of taking an unpaid internship, but in this industry, it's kind of the best way to just start getting connections. So whether you're kind of working on the side or you have to save up money before moving, definitely looking into possible internships and even doing interviews over the phone or Skype, and just letting people know that you're ready to come out whenever, I think is a good way to kind of take it one step at a time before moving out here.
Awesome. Is there anything else that maybe we haven't covered? Any advice that you would like to give that you think would be beneficial to the audience?
I think we've pretty much covered it all, but I do kind of want to touch on something Jordan said earlier, which is don't be afraid to reach out to people and say, hey, I'm just getting into the industry. I would love 15 minutes of your time. I would love to buy you a coffee and just ask you a few questions. And there are a lot of ways to do that. Again, people that you know through somebody, your friend's boss, your friend who lives in LA, maybe you could ask if you could talk to their boss on the phone for 15 minutes. You'd be surprised at how often they're like, yeah, sure, why not? It might get rescheduled once or twice, but it'll happen. And at your internships, you might intern, and only interact if you're in a larger company. You might only interact with, a few people around you. Don't be afraid to ask whoever's, in charge of you, hey, could I talk to somebody for 15 minutes in so-and-so department? Or, can I talk to the big boss for 10 minutes, depending on where you are. Just don't be afraid to, put yourself out there and meet those people. And this is an industry where it only works where we all pay it forward, because yes, there's film school and whatnot, but for the most part, this is really an industry where you learn as you go rather than in a classroom. So it's all about the people, and the people around you and the people you meet, and putting yourself out there to meet those people.
Also, to add to that, as you're doing all this and reaching out and kind of trying and failing, I think it's the best advice I can give, and something I try to convince myself too, is to just not lose faith. I mean, this is an industry, not with some hierarchy or ladder that you climb up. It's an industry where there's a lot of lateral movement, and it's an industry where there's kind of a lot of steps backwards. So it feels like you're not kind of gaining much ground, but it's kind of one where you keep having to chip away at it. And you'll find that, a lot of people in this industry, be them actors or writers or producers or directors, they don't make it big when they're in their early 20s. It's a lifetime of experience that gets you to that point. And the culmination of like all of your experience, be it kind of whether or not you consider them failures or not, you're kind of learning the entire way and at every step of the way. So it often feels like you're not going anywhere, but in reality, you're kind of learning and just gaining more and more experience. And you'll often kind of look back after and realize how far you actually have come. So I guess just don't lose faith and keep going. It's the best advice I can give.
Well, thanks again for coming on the show, guys. I'm sure the advice and insight you gave will definitely be helpful to someone out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, great talking to you guys. Talk to you later.
All right.
Once again, that was Annabelle Boyanova and Jordan Mahoney from Groundswell Productions. For today's Stuff You Should Read segment, I actually want to introduce you guys to a book that would be very helpful if any of you end up interning or working at a studio or production company that requires you to do script coverage. Now, what is script coverage? I didn't know what it was when I first found out I was going to be interning in LA, so I bought a book, as I'm prone to doing, to give me a better idea of what it consists of. The book that I ended up buying is titled Screenplay Story Analysis: The Art and Business by Asher Garfinkel. Script coverage is basically how a production company goes about grading and analyzing a script. As Jordan and Annabelle mentioned earlier, a lot of these companies get tons of scripts from writers who are hoping that they'll help them bring their characters to life. As script coverage allows people like Annabelle and Jordan to quickly determine whether or not a script idea is worth producing. An intern that gets a script to read will usually read it and write a script coverage. The coverage consists of a summary of what the script is about, what the story is, and it'll have another section dedicated to the intern's comments and opinions about the script. And then usually there's also a section where the intern assigns grades to various aspects of the story, like how original the story idea is there an audience for it, Would it be easy to market? What's the story structure? Is the plot good? How's the characterization? Is the dialogue any good? Etc. So learning how to write a script coverage is very important because as an intern, your opinion means a lot and you want to be able to articulate your views very well and in a way that your company wants you to. Garfinkel covers everything you need to know about script coverage in this book, so I would definitely recommend you take a look at it if you're not familiar with how to write one. Once again, if you have any questions or comments, please connect with me on Twitter at CourtneyJ_media or leave me a comment on whatever platform that you're listening to this podcast episode on. Thank you so much for listening.